Alright, let's dive into how to conjugate the te form in Japanese. I always say the te form is just like a Swiss Army knife. It has many uses in Japanese, and here's what it can do. Well, first, it connects actions in a sequence, just like and in English. For example, I went to the store and bought groceries. You say, 店に行って食料品を買った. And number two, it shows causes and effects. Like when you want to say, because it was raining, I stayed home. You say, 雨が降っていて家にいた. It can also indicate how something is done. For instance, I wrote a letter using a pen is ペンを使って手紙を書いた. Or it makes friendly requests. If you want to say, hey, take a look, you say, 見て見て. And lastly, it describes continuous actions. For example, I am studying is 勉強している. Now, the te form is very important also because if you mastered it, you've automatically learned how to conjugate the ta form, which is the plain past form or the past tense of the dictionary form, which we'll talk about later. Now, here's one thing that makes the te form a bit tricky, and that is, its conjugation rule for the type 1 verbs can be a little different from anything you've learned so far. But don't worry, with a little bit of help from me, I promise you'll find it much easier than you think. After all, this course is called Japanese Verbs Made Easy for a reason. Now, we're going to look at how to conjugate the te form. For type 1 verbs, we divide them into 4 subgroups. Let's go through them one by one. First, let's look at subgroup 1. In subgroup 1, verbs end in su. For example, 話す and 返す. For these verbs, you remove the su ending and add して to form the te form, add した to form the ta form. So, 話す becomes 話して for te form and 話した for ta form. Similarly, 返す becomes 返して for te form and 返した for ta form. And for subgroup 2, the verbs end in ku or gu. For example, 聞く or 泳ぐ. And for these verbs, you remove the ku or gu ending and add ite or ide respectively to form the te form, and you add ita or ida respectively to form the ta form. So 聞く becomes 聞いて for te form and 聞いた for ta form. Similarly, 泳ぐ becomes 泳いで for te form and 泳いだ for ta form. Here's one thing you need to pay attention to. The verb 行く, which means to go, is the only exception. It becomes 行って for the te form and 行った for the ta form. Moving on to subgroup 3. The verbs in subgroup 3 end in う, つ or る. For example, 買う, 待つ, and 作る. For these verbs, you remove the う, つ or る ending and add て for the te form and た for the ta form. So, 買う becomes 買って for te form and 買った for ta form. 待つ becomes 待って for te form and 待った for ta form. 作る becomes 作って for te form and 作った for ta form. Next, we're going to look at subgroup 4. The verbs in subgroup 4 end in ぶ, ぬ or む. For example, 遊ぶ and 死ぬ and 読む. For these verbs, you remove the ぶ, ぬ or む ending and add んで for the te form and んだ for the ta form. So, 遊ぶ becomes 遊んで for te form and 遊んだ for ta form. 死ぬ becomes 死んで for te form and 死んだ for ta form. 読む becomes 読んで for te form and 読んだ for ta form. And as for type 2 verbs, everything is so much easier. You simply drop the ru and add te for the te form and ta for the ta form. So, 始める becomes 始めて and 始めた. And 食べる becomes 食べて and 食べた. 着る becomes 着て and 着た. 起きる becomes 起きて and 起きた. 見る becomes 見て and 見た. And as for type 3 verbs, treat them as new vocab words as usual. So, 来る becomes 来て for the te form and 来た for the ta form. And する becomes して for the te form and した for the ta form. Okay, so you know challenge mainly comes from the type 1 verbs. So once you master the 4 subgroups, everything else will be a breeze. Now, see you in the next video.